1 year ago, we explored the period in Superman history from 1986 to 1993 in our series Crisis Till Death. Now, the podcast returns to the Triangle era as we survey the post-Death and Reign landscape in comics, toys, video games, and television. This is Death Til Wedding, a new 7-part epic covering 1993 through 1996. Welcome to Digging for Kryptonite, a Superman fan journey. I am your host, Anthony Desiato. This is Death Til Wedding, Part 1. Joining me to discuss Superman Doomsday Hunter-Prey, the 1995 Doomsday Annual, the Doomsday Wars, and the Kenner line of action figures Man of Steel is returning guest, sweet Bernie Gerstmayr. Welcome, my friend.
Wow, I got 4 sweets for this podcast. That's pretty awesome, Anthony.
I put a little sauce on that one. You did.
You threw a little something on it. That was awesome. I love it. Hey, I'm so excited to start part 1 because we got to do Death and Return of Superman together. So we're just connecting right through the storylines, man.
This is the long-awaited sequel by me, if no one else. But last year, we did Crisis Till Death. We covered the period of time from Man of Steel through the Death and Reign from 86 to 93. It was an epic run of episodes. And we're back now for the sequel to cover the next few years in the Triangle era. And just like we did last time, where we had our episode on the Ruby Spears cartoon that was happening during that time period, similarly here, we'll touch on what was going on beyond the comics, including, like I said, the action figure line. And what's particularly interesting for me with this event, and I really hope that people enjoy it, I'm so excited to get into it, is that last year, most of what we were reading and talking about was new to me, as we discussed. I had read some of the Byrne stuff and here and there, but most of what we were reading was new until we got to Death, of course. And it was fascinating to really get the context for everything leading up to my start in comics. But now we're past that, and now we're moving into the era that I remember reading as I was growing up, but that I have not gone back to since that time, including the stories that we're going to talk about today. So this will have a different flavor to it, and I'll be coming at it from a different place, and I can't wait to get into it.
Yeah, it's very nostalgic, and I said this to you earlier that I have not read some of this until it got reprinted in trade form, which was a few years after. But this is going to be a great podcast because I'm so excited. I loved reading this whole section. It was a lot of fun.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you coming along for this ride. So in terms of the reading material, and like I said, we'll also get to that action figure line, but as far as the reading material, so you and I, we have the 5-volume set that DC put out, 5 series of trade paperbacks collecting the Death, Funeral, Reign, Return, and then the 5th volume is called Doomsday, and it collects the stories that we read. So Superman Doomsday Hunter-Prey and the Doomsday Wars, both written and drawn by Dan Jurgens. They were each 3-part prestige format miniseries. And then we also have the 1995 Doomsday Annual, which had a handful of short stories written by the then, for the most part, the then current stable of Superman writers. So you had Louise Simonson, you had Jurgens, you had Roger Stern, you had Jerry Ordway. And that makes up that 5th volume in that trade paperback set. So if anyone's curious exactly what we were working off of, that's the volume.
Yeah, that Doomsday Annual is one of my favorites. At that time in the 90s, every year was a different theme to the annuals. So like 1994 was all when you first saw Elseworlds. That was the first start of that. And then 95 was all year 1. And so then it explained the backstory of what we don't know about Doomsday, not his creation, but kind of what he's been doing since creation to when we find him buried in Earth. It's really cool.
Yes. Unless you happen to like a little bit of mystery, because these stories just obliterate that, but that's okay. I had a lot of fun with these stories. And like I said, last year was all about understanding what led us to the death of Superman. Now, I'm curious to survey the post-Death and Reign landscape through adult eyes, and I think it'll be a really worthwhile endeavor. Like yourself, we were talking off mic. I really enjoyed reading these stories. Overall, I found them enjoyable, interesting, and in particular from a character perspective, I thought there was a lot of great character work with Clark, especially. And so I enjoyed that. I guess, and not to nitpick, but we're here to have a discussion. I think where I had a little bit of difficulty, and ultimately I'm glad we have these stories, but the question I kept coming back to was, in learning Doomsday's origin, in having these rematches, in sort of tracking his path from creation to his emergence at the start of Death of Superman, is it sort of the law of diminishing returns at play? Are we losing a little bit by sort of taking away that mystery? I guess that was sort of the question that I was having as I was reading it. It sounds like that was not something that was bugging you, though, as you were going through these.
It wasn't bugging me. What was bugging me when I was rereading Doomsday Wars, which we'll get to, what was bugging me was me keep going, well, I just read Hunter Prey, and I know how we got rid of Doomsday and Hunter Prey. So how could they possibly have brought him back this time? So I think that, I'll be honest, I thought they were very creative. I thought it was actually, even though you like a little more mystery, I'm glad they didn't go super timey-wimey on us. I mean, there's still a little 0 hour stuff in there that comes into play, but I think they were pretty creative to bring a very popular enemy back. And we also get to see, which we'll talk about soon, we get to see the legit Justice League go up against Doomsday, which no offense to like the Bloodwind fans out there and Booster Gold Blue Beetle, but like the first Justice League that fought Doomsday was kind of like Bush League, Justice League. But there's a lot to unpack, and I enjoyed a lot of this because we see kind of my, I wish things that happen in these miniseries. So it's kind of cool.
Gotcha. Well, it's funny that you talk about the lesser Justice League that we got the first time around, because even Wonder Woman in the story makes a remark about that to Doomsday.
Yeah. Like she said, I don't know, what did she say? Like a weaker team. It's like she just throws shade. The B team wasn't the real team.
Exactly. So these three stories, I had never read that Doomsday Annual. So this was the first time for me with that, but I had at least once, but probably a couple of times, read Hunter Prey and the Doomsday Wars. So Hunter Prey was 1994, and then Doomsday Wars was 98. So that was now towards the tail end of the Jurgens tenure on the Superman books. But again, these were separate. They were their own miniseries, but still in continuity. And I guess I have more of a vivid memory of Doomsday Wars. Like I remember buying that at the comic book store. Yeah. Hunter Prey, man, for the life of me, I remember reading it as a kid. I have a vague memory of being at the Jefferson Valley Mall in New York, being at a bookstore, but I think I might be conflating that with the Eradicator trade paperback that I had a similar encounter with.
That's possible. How old would you have been in now 95?
94, I was 7.
94.
Yeah, 7.
Oh yeah. See, I mean, and Hunter Prey, those were some of the first prestige 3-parters. I think they were maybe $6 cover price, each one of those. So that wasn't an easy sell, even to a parent. I remember being in college and I was like, oh, it's going to cost me $20 to get this whole thing. And back then that was when the books were $1 or $1.50. It was a lot different, but I loved it
for sure. And as far as the format of it, I came across an interview that Jurgens did in 2019 on the 25th anniversary of Hunter Prey with CBR. And he was talking about the background of the story and his intentions with it and that format. And so, he talked about wanting to do it himself and not have it be part of the Triangle era books. And also liking that format, liking the expanded page count and the higher production value and being able, not that it was overly gratuitous in terms of violence or anything like that, but it was able to kind of push it a little bit more. And even more so than the violence side of it, I think like I said before, the character work, the introspection, the psychology that you get, I feel like it was able to go a little bit deeper than what you were getting in the regular books at the time. Not to put them down, but this had a deeper level to it, I felt.
I would agree. Prestige formats back then, especially late 80s, 90s, if you were to equate it to anything now, it was the start of Black Label. It was allowed to have a little more wiggle room. And I remember, newsstand copies of the regular comics were still paper, I believe. But the Prestige format had the magazine pages, and it was just oh, you know what? I'm going to pay $6 for this. It's worth it. It's awesome. I have a whole box of not only the original Hunter Preys, but all of the Superman prestiges from early 90s through. And if you're out there, if you're at a con or a show or a store and you see these, pick them up. Like, they are great reads, and they're just fun to have. And the cover art is so cool from book to book. So I don't know. I'm going to totally geek out on this episode. I love all of this. And Jurgens and Breeding, we'll get to them. Like, they are my boys. Like, I was like living the life reading this again.
Yeah, that's the thing. Well, first of all, I echo what you say about the format. Sadly, I've parted with all the ones that I had as a kid, but I do remember them. I remember them fondly. And you know what? There's a lot that's, not collected and not available digitally. I think that one of the things that I was looking for recently was a one shot that I think Chuck Dixon wrote called The Odyssey that followed Clark on his travels around the world. Yeah. And I remember reading that. I no longer have it. And to my knowledge, it's not available anywhere. So yeah, it's one of those things that, to your point, if you see it at a con, pick it up. But no, I really like the presentation. And I think I recognize or at least I like to think there's a level of integrity with these projects. And not that it would have been lesser, so to speak, if it had been part of the monthly books, but I think that setting it apart gave it a little more added weight and made it feel like this was more of a story to be told rather than an event to be sold. Yeah. And because when you think about the timing of it, and even if you go on the DC app and you go to their Triangle Era Volume 2 page, and I'm assuming they have it generally in publication order. I mean, it's like a few lines down from the start of Volume 2 of the Triangle Era. So this was not that long after Superman came back. So they could have very easily made this the sequel rematch in the pages of the regular comics. But I like that they set it aside. And look, you and I and the other guests that I've had on, talking about the Triangle Era, those creative teams worked wonderfully together and created this weekly adventure. But like we always say, they were always these poor creators were always only writing part 1, part 3, part 4. So to have Jurgens, one of the chief architects who did Superman 75, to be able to kind of play with Doomsday in these 2-3 issue miniseries, I think it was deserved and I think was done to great effect.
I'm trying to think back, and maybe you can remember. So they bring back Doomsday also in the 2000s, in like the Reign of Doomsday, the Return of Doomsday, and it's not great. But I do believe they brought Jurgens back to do some of that stuff. They haven't really allowed anybody to play in that sandbox except for Dan Jurgens. I think there's something special about that character that DC's been like, you know what, let's have Dan touch on this. I feel it's pretty consistent.
Well, it's interesting, and there might be another episode or so on this at some point in the future because there is a decent amount more out there. So just real quick, Doomsday returned. So after the Doomsday Wars, we'll talk about where we leave him there. Split between transporters on the moon. We'll get there, but
it's kind of cool. I like it.
I did too.
Yeah.
But so after that, he popped up again in the Our Worlds at War event, which we've covered before during the Jeff Loeb, Joe Kelly era, where Luthor and Manchester Black and the Elite, they used Doomsday as a weapon against Imperiex, and Imperiex seemingly destroys Doomsday. Cut to Superman 175, the 100 issue anniversary of the death of Superman, and Lex has preserved, regrown Doomsday as part of the Joker's Last Laugh event. And he develops sentience in this, and he's able to speak, and that ultimately proves to be his undoing. Superman has this whole speech about, well, if you can think, then you can feel and you can fear. And basically that's the end of that iteration of Doomsday. And Lex ultimately trades Doomsday to Darkseid.
Correct.
And Darkseid later creates an army of Doomsdays, which we see in the Supergirl arc of Superman Batman.
Correct.
It gets spottier for me after that. And Wikipedia came in here a little bit, and also just kind of scrolling through the app. But you had mentioned right before the New 52, I guess, right before Flashpoint, there was the Reign of the Doomsday event that Paul Cornell wrote right after his Black Ring storyline. Right.
Yeah, it's the last trades and the last arcs before New 52 takes over.
Gotcha. And then, though I recently covered the New 52, I didn't do crossovers, so I did skip the Doomed event, but I know they used Doomsday in the New 52. So that's one of the more recent ones. And then one thing that I did read and cover was the Path of Doom arc during the Rebirth era, the Dan Jurgens arc on Action Comics, where they had yet another rematch.
It doesn't get much better. I'll be honest. Like after Doomsday Wars, I don't love the reiterations that because like you were saying earlier, there's only so much you can really do. And they tried to be more clever, but it's just not great. It's okay. I think Hunter Prey tops, and then Doomsday Wars is a close second, like to keep him around. And then I think they should just let it be.
I agree. Look, I recognize it's a tough spot, I think, for DC as a publisher and for any creator coming on, because, this is an iconic character. This is a character who killed Doomsday. So it's understandable that there would be an instinct to want to use the character. But like I said before, I just keep coming back to this law of diminishing returns where, each time you use him, I feel like it's less and less effective because, again, I feel like there's only so much mileage you can get out of this character and so many things you can do. And we talked about this last year, but it's like when you're, when your first story, in your first story, you kill the main character. It's like, where do you go from there?
Well, and they also made a really good point about in the creation of Doomsday that they now make as canon in Hunter Prey. They're saying that Doomsday learns every time he fights somebody and he evolves. So you can't even beat him the same way you did. Like, that's clever, but that also kind of paints you into a corner as a writer. Like, oh gosh, like we did this last time. Now what do we do? And so I can totally hear what you're saying. And I think that gets really, really tough. And I think that's why it's gotten progressively worse, because it's not easy to do.
Now, bear with me, like 2 minutes here. I'm not going to make this the whole episode, but Smallville put a very different spin on the character by giving him a human side, human camouflage.
Yeah.
This paramedic, Davis Bloom, who's struggling with the beast inside. This was season 8 of the show. I have my issues, and I've been vocal with my issues about the end of that season. It will forever haunt me, but I guess I'm just curious in terms of the concept, I guess, maybe even more so than the execution, but the idea of human camouflage and, he's living a normal life and then the monster emerges. Do you like that or not so much?
I actually did. Like, is that season 8?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. I think I love like the first third of season 8.
Okay.
I think I'm like, oh, this is a really cool way to introduce Doomsday to people that don't know Doomsday, and also to us who are like, we've seen this. What else are you going to do? I think that was pretty creative. We're not going to get into the rabbit hole of what they chose to finish and how much we actually saw Doomsday fight Clark and all that stuff. But yeah. But I actually did like that concept. I'm also a Sam Witwer fan. Like, I don't know how many there are out there, but I actually really like him quite a bit from that show and also Battlestar Galactica and Clone Wars and everything else. But so I was already like in his corner when I was rewatching it. So
no, I hear you. We'll talk about it more down the line, another place and time. But I just bring that up because, especially when we talk about adaptations, Batman v Superman is another, famous one, but it still gives us that mindless monster. We arrived there a little bit differently. But Smallville, again, I think really put a different spin on it. And here's my segue now back to what we're really here to talk about. Watching that season of Smallville, you do Sam Witwer fan or not, although I'm with you, I am a Sam Witwer fan, but you do care for the character. They introduce him. He's a great guy. He's this paramedic. He's saving people. And then he's struggling with this monster within.
Yeah.
So now bringing us back to Hunter Prey, we get the origin of Doomsday, and I'm not saying that they make Doomsday a sympathetic character, but maybe a tragic one to some extent. I mean, he's still a mindless creature, but he's the result of all of these years of experimentation and horror. So that, I guess that's a little bit of a parallel that I see of again, at least some element of tragedy.
I always remember that. I think it's part 2 of Hunter Prey, where they go into the actual, this is who Doomsday really is, where he came from. There's also the really cool reveal. Like, they don't quite let the last piece of that story come until a little later, where Wave Rider's like, yeah, I wasn't sure I was going to tell you this, but I probably should tell you this. It is dark as hell. Like when you really look at Dan went super dark writing this creation. Because I guess if you are going to reverse engineer a killing machine like Doomsday, you kind of have to give him like a pretty rough origin. Like nobody just turns into this and oh my gosh, we're gonna go down the route of so we have a baby. We're gonna put a baby outside and then we're gonna let it get killed and torn apart. And then we're gonna take the DNA and make another one and then do it again. And we're gonna do it over the course of 30 years. I think that's how long it was that the experiment lasts. And I'm sorry I'm stealing your thunder, but like this is I was rereading it going like, damn, Dan Jurgens. Like, because just the idea of you're cloning this creature over and over again, and it's retaining the death of getting torn apart in the wilderness by creatures that are terrible. But the karma factor of all of that, how it comes back, is just, again, also super dark. And we've never really seen that kind of dark writing from Dan Jurgens. Like, Doomsday itself was hard, but it's incredible.
Yeah. And well, again, and maybe that's an instance of being, outside the regular books and having this format to play around in that, he was able to go there. But yeah, I mean, one thing I want to say is nice. I don't want to forget because this came up. It came up when I was reading it, and then it was reinforced when I read that interview with Jurgens. So when Wave Rider shows Superman how Doomsday came to be, there are these scientists, right, out in this very harsh environment, like you said, and they are being led by this alien from another planet, Bertrand or Bertrand. I'm going to go with Bertrand because I feel like that's more badass. So Bertrand here is the ringleader. And we never find out where Bertrand came from, what his home planet is, which I think is an interesting little dangling thread. But beyond that, Bertrand makes this point of, at the beginning, he mentions that they're starting with this infant, and he says he's not a native to your world.
Right.
And I said to myself, does this ever get resolved? And it didn't within the stories we read. I didn't remember anything else from other stories I had read, but I went to Wikipedia, and I think Wikipedia let me down because reading that entry, it was written to make it sound like the infant they started with had been genetically engineered. And that was not my understanding. It seemed like they were starting with a natural born infant. And then
I thought so too.
After the baby died, then they were regrowing him.
Yeah.
And so I said, did I misunderstand that? And that was kind of the end of it. And then I read that interview and they brought that up with Jurgens. And he said that's sort of, still out there. I mean, he didn't give any hints as to where he might go with that. But my understanding after that interview is that, that was a baby from another world that has never been identified, which again, I feel like there might be a little potential here to do a little something.
Right. Like who were those parents? What's the origin world of that? I did think that was kind of smart though, because now that when we find out that this is from Kryptonian scientists and Kryptonian science, and we're looking at the still part of the John Byrne run of what Krypton looked like, that they were grown. They were a scientific community and planet. And that's why Cal is so different, because Jor-El and Lara made him. They actually had the baby. So when I first read it, and even the second reread, I did go, it's a baby that was made on Krypton, because we find out that it's all Kryptonian. But that's an interesting loophole that you're bringing up too, that Dan says too, is like, hey, you never know. That I would love to see that. That would be a cool way to bring that back.
I mean, I know I've been going on about like leave Doomsday alone, but I don't know. That might be a fun wrinkle to explore. So going back to the beginning of the Hunter Prey miniseries, this 1994 storyline, we begin with Clark having this nightmare, right? He's a kid. There's a monster in the basement. He's scared. Yep. And when he finally goes down to face it, it's Doomsday. And then adult Clark wakes up in a cold sweat. It's very, it's funny. It's very wholesome and very chaste. Like he and Lois are engaged at this point. She knows his identity, but they're still living and sleeping separately. He has to put on his costume and fly over to talk to her. But it was... And I will kind of go, I think we should go in order, but I just want to jump to Doomsday Wars for a second, because Jurgens employs a similar device there, where each issue and throughout the issues, we get the story of young Clark and Pete and Lana on the farm during and after this terrible blizzard that results in the death of the Kent cattle. And it's a very rough time for the family. So that was one of the things that, I don't know that you would have seen that in the regular monthly books, or certainly not to the extent that we got here. So I appreciate that. And that's the thing. Whatever misgivings I may have about giving Doomsday an origin and giving him this particular origin, and I'll share what those misgivings are. But that aside, the emotional hook of this story, that Clark died and came back, and he's haunted by the thing that killed him, and he's afraid because he doesn't know if Doomsday's still out there. He knows that cyborg Superman hurled Doomsday into space on that asteroid. Which again goes to show how long Jurgens had been setting this up, right? Because that happened very early on in Reign of the Supermen. So he knows the body is out there. Clark came back. Maybe Doomsday did too. Maybe there are more like him. Maybe someone finds him and recreates him. These are valid fears to have, and I really, really appreciated that Jurgens took Clark to that place.
As I was I know I like how you said it isn't cheesy, but it's the nightmare thing actually was one of my favorite parts of that whole run. Hunter Prey to me either screams we should do an animated rendition of this, or I wish and hope sometime down the road that there is some sort of HBO Max ability where they start doing projects like this where, listen, we're going to hire somebody who's going to be the HBO Max Superman. And he's going to do a series, kind of like they're doing Green Lantern Corps. I'm sure we're going to have, that's who Jon Stewart is. Whether they do it in movies or not, but man, Hunter Prey really tracks like a movie. The way it's broken down into acts, the way it's even set up, that nightmare, he's trying to cure the nightmare. The nightmare, he wants to wake up from that dream with a different ending. And oh man, I had an asterisk, this is awesome in my notes. And I think you and I've always talked about that, how we love these little nuances that are outside the story, but they add so much to it, whether it's narration or this little aside, Superman gets scared too. This is important for us to know.
Well, yes, I agree totally. And I remember when you and I were talking about the death of Superman last year, and that idea of fear, it was the issue of Justice League that was part of the death of Superman, where Superman was being interviewed by Cat Grant. And she had asked him, do you ever get scared? And he was like, yeah, sometimes I do. And I appreciated that they at least threw that in there.
Right.
But it wasn't something that had sort of been seeded throughout leading up to the story. It was kind of put in there, and it gave you a little bit of a sense of where his head was. But, for the rest of that story, you just didn't have the real estate to mine the psychology, what he was going through in the moment. So, yeah, to be able to take the time now, I think was such a great choice. And look, we always try on the show to knock down the ridiculous arguments against Superman, he's not relatable. I think this is a perfect example. See, something like this is a beautiful example of how the character can be larger than life. He died and came back to life, right?
Yeah.
But he's also this scared little boy in his dream who doesn't want to go into the basement to face the monster. So, that's... When you talk about relatability, it's we all have something, whatever it is, that keeps us up.
It's such a very human characteristic. Okay, let's compare. So Doomsday is the one thing that could kill Superman. Did kill Superman. Let's think about something that is in our world. So let's say you're suffering from cancer. You're cured and you go into remission, but guaranteed, patients that go into remission are always fearing, will it come back? And that's an exact representation of what he's thinking about. I know I'm alive. I know he's out in space on an asteroid, but I really don't know. Maybe he will come back. So that's a very human trait for him to be vulnerable enough to show and talk to Lois about. Because again, they're going to get married. They got to be talking about this kind of stuff.
And it put a totally different spin on the fight with Doomsday than we had the first time.
Yeah.
The first time, it takes Clark a while. It's pretty deep into the story before he realizes, okay, this this could be the end. Like I might be able to stop him, but that might be the last thing I do.
Yeah.
Here, though, he knows the fate that's likely to befall him. So when he goes into battle, it's everything he's doing is colored by that. And I think, and here's where I give Jurgens so much credit because, we could have just had the nightmare bookends, right? But there were instances throughout that really reinforced it. Like when Desaad transports Doomsday away via boom tube and Clark is racing to try to catch Doomsday and he can't get there in time. And then he asks himself, did I let him go? Like, did I purposely slow down?
Yeah, that was a cool moment. Like, we all ask ourselves that, like, it's like the fight or flight, right? We talk about that. Did I mean to do that? Did I want to do that? Again, I'm not trying to just like gush love over this miniseries, but listeners, if you haven't read this yet and you're clearly a fan of Superman, this is something you need to dig into. And there's so much new material, I think, if you haven't read this, that you will just kind of be in awe of like, wow, there's some stuff out there. Just the fact that Darkseid is scared of Doomsday. And we see that in Hunter Prey, and we see it then eventually in the Annual. When he sees one of his best friends get mutilated and you see Darkseid's eyes get wide. That was an awesome moment rereading that. I was like, holy crap, Darkseid's scared. This is incredible.
Well, hold that thought. We'll talk more about that right after this commercial break. We'll be right back. Hey everyone, looking for even more Superman talk? If you enjoy digging for kryptonite, and I hope you do, be sure to check out my new series, another exciting episode in the Adventures of Superman. It's a rewatch podcast covering the classic George Reeves television show from the 50s. You know from this podcast that I fell in love with Adventures of Superman and George's tough but charming take on the Man of Steel. Now, I get to explore that show episode by episode on my new rewatch podcast. Many of your favorite guests from this show are also popping up on the new series, and I hope you'll join us too. New episodes of another exciting episode drop every other Monday, and of course, Digging for Kryptonite continues weekly every Tuesday. Find another exciting episode in the Adventures of Superman on your podcast platform of choice, and be sure to subscribe right away. Adventures await. Acme Comics is a locally owned and operated full-service comic book store in Greensboro, North Carolina for people of all ages and walks of life. Since 1983, this 9-time Eisner Award nominee uses their collective knowledge and resources to connect you with the best material available. They pride themselves on their significant contemporary and vintage back issue selection. Mail order subscriptions to new releases are available, and all offerings are available to anyone, anywhere via mail order. Follow Acme on social media and eBay, listen to the Acme Cast on all podcast services, and visit acmecomics.com for much more. Film lovers and filmmakers should check out this family of film festivals: Brightside Tavern in Jersey City, Hang On to Your Shorts in Asbury Park, Point Lookout on Long Island, and In the Cut in Bloomfield, New Jersey. I was fortunate enough to have my work shown at these festivals, and I found them to be very enjoyable and well-run events. Submission information for filmmakers, as well as details about the festivals generally, can be found at filmfreeway.com. Follow the festivals on social media for news and updates about events, discounts, tickets, and more. Also, be sure to listen to the Hang On to Your Shorts and Cullen on Film podcasts, available via a shared universe network. Fat Moose Comics is New Jersey's best and oldest comic book store. Established in 1982 and currently under new ownership, Moose sells a wide selection of new and old comics from every publisher, action figures, graphic novels, posters, statues, and more. If you're looking for something and they don't have it, they can probably get it for you. They know a guy. Visit Fat Moose in Whippany the next time you're in the Garden State, and be sure to reach out via the Fat Moose Comics Facebook page. Flat Squirrel Productions is an affiliate of BCW Supplies. The next time you need to restock on comic book bags, boards, boxes, and more, be sure to use promo code FSP, that's FSP for Flat Squirrel Productions, to save 10% on your order, and it helps support the show. Thank you. Aw Yeah Comics celebrates and promotes everything that is wonderful about comics, toys, artwork, and the joy they bring to people. Visit them in person at one of their 3 locations: Harrison, New York, which happens to be my local comic shop, Skokie, Illinois, or Muncie, Indiana. If you have children and have been looking for a family-friendly store, look no further. Join Aw Yeah for exciting events, including creator signings, how-tos, and more. Visit awyeahcomics.com and follow Aw Yeah on social media for more. Their name says exactly how they feel about it. Aw yeah. And we're back. So you're talking about Darkseid being scared. So let's talk about the Darkseid piece of this. So we discussed how Clark is having these nightmares. He goes to Lois. He's like, I got to find out what happened to Doomsday if he's still out there. I have to face this nightmare. And simultaneously, Doomsday has been found in space by these, interstellar scavengers who are going to bring the ore from the asteroid to Apocalypse to sell or something like that. But Doomsday wakes up and, of course, annihilates everyone on the ship. And then when he arrives on Apocalypse, begins a rampage there. And we haven't even talked about this yet. We also get the return of Cyborg Superman, or just Cyborg at this point.
Yeah, right.
Who had, and we find out now why he had hurled Doomsday into space. He had planted this little device on him that would allow him to, reconstitute his consciousness at some point.
Plan B.
Yep. So Cyborg emerges, and I had totally forgotten this. So it is kind of cool. So Doomsday, kills one of the Apocalypse soldiers. He's got the spike through his head, right? And then that's the organic and inorganic material that Cyborg uses to create a new form for himself, and that gives us that red and black and long-haired look. Which I guess it makes sense. He always wants to be Superman. Well, there's that really
cool armor. Remember too, like on Apocalypse, right before that guy gets offed by Doomsday, he's talking about how awesome his exo armor and how strong the exo armor is to fight anything. So, of course, that'd be a pretty good idea for Cyborg to morph with that armor and organic material. I loved it. I love it.
That costume or that look has never been my favorite. I don't hate it, but I prefer him as a Cyborg Superman, or I do like the more recent costume he had when he was primarily a Green Lantern antagonist.
Oh yeah, okay.
Because that sort of, was its own thing, but still had the foundation of a Superman costume, but uniform. I always say costume, but you know what I mean. So we get the return of Cyborg here. I guess Cyborg kind of falls into the same category for me as Doomsday, although I'm a little bit more forgiving of Cyborg, I think, because I do think there is more you can explore there. This is a character who keeps coming back, and we'll get to him again in an upcoming episode in this event. I know he popped up again during the trial of Superman. Was his return here welcome for you? Like, oh yeah, Cyborg's back, or
I don't know. I wouldn't say it wasn't welcome. I think it was like a distraction. I was kind of like, enough of this crap. Get out of the way. Let's get back to the Doomsday stuff. That's how I was kind of approaching it a little bit. But again, Cyborg Superman is one of my favorite iterations and characters. If I see anything merchandise for him, I'm always going to pick it up. It's just, I think it was a really, really cool character. I think Hank, I do feel sympathy for Hank Henshaw, because he's basically just an unstable human who is broken. He broke because of what happened to him and his wife and his friends, and he's just not there. He's a psychopath now. But I love his character, and I actually would kind of like to see that character come back somehow. I don't know how.
Well, his consciousness can't be destroyed, so there's always a way.
Yeah.
But one of the things that was most interesting to me, I agree. I think he didn't have a large part to play in this. Right. Doomsday's rampaging, fighting Darkseid, which we'll get back to in a second. And meanwhile, Cyborg is attempting to take over Apocalypse, and is sort of the coup de grace is killing the food supplies. And ultimately, we do get the rematch with, Superman and Cyborg, but ultimately it's Darkseid who obliterates Cyborg via Omega Beam. Of course, we find out later that Darkseid has captured the consciousness, to potentially use in the future. But it appears to Superman that Darkseid has killed Cyborg. And what struck me was Superman's like, how could you kill him? When I destroyed him in Coast City, I knew his consciousness would return. Now, you and I talked about this, about how that did not seem to be the case. So I went back to Superman 82. I went back to the big climax of Reign of the Supermen when we have the showdown where Superman punches a hole.
Punches her. And doesn't he vibrate?
And he vibrates and Cyborg explodes. So in fairness, I think we were kind of right and kind of wrong, because rereading it, he does say that like Henshaw, like his consciousness has the ability to survive.
Yeah.
So based on that, it appears that maybe his intent wasn't truly to kill. However, in that same scene, Green Lantern goes, "Oh, I just scanned this whole place. That there's no trace of him." And Superman like doesn't miss a beat. He just goes, "Oh well, I guess he's dead then."
Yeah. It's like it was very Willy Wonka, like, oh, so sad. Okay, bye. Like,
yeah. So even if the intent wasn't there at the moment of vibrating that fist, he definitely wasn't sad at the prospect that he had actually killed him. So I think we were, we weren't totally on the mark, but we were pretty close.
Right. So before we move on a little further, there's something I really loved about, and it's kind of a little bit foreshadowing to what we're going to learn about in the annuals. But when Doomsday like hitches a ride into the stowaway off the asteroid onto the ship to pop, like everybody, like when he comes on the ship and they turn the asteroid around, they recognize who Doomsday is. And I think that's what's very different. Like when we as Earthlings experience Doomsday for the first time, it's just like, we thought he just was new. He came out of the ground and now he starts destroying things. But the rest of the universe already knows that, what did they say? The Armageddon creature?
The Armageddon creature. His reputation precedes him. Yeah.
I loved all of that because we don't know what's coming in the annual. So it's like, wait, why? And Darkseid, I think the first thing that Darkseid says is, yeah, we're going to need to evacuate. And I was like, wait, what the hell? Darkseid says we're evacuating Apocalypse. So how does everybody know who Doomsday is? That's what I was like, okay, somebody better answer that question soon. And then we get the Doomsday annuals.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, you get obviously a decent piece of it in Hunter Prey, but yeah, more so in the annual where you get to see Doomsday's interstellar travels before, before he lands on Earth. And yeah, the Darkseid piece of it is interesting. And I guess I wasn't aware of this, but a bit controversial at how seemingly easily Darkseid is defeated. Darkseid, like you said, he, almost instantly, right, talks about evacuation. So it's like, okay, like this seems odd for Darkseid of all people. And then when they finally face off, Darkseid uses the Omega beams. And for a second, it seems like, okay, maybe this worked. But of course it didn't. And Doomsday attacks him from behind and like takes him out. Yeah,
like slashes blood out of his back. And I was like, what is happening? Because we all know Darkseid is like the baddest of the bad. We're talking about the new gods. Like nobody can defeat this guy.
What's funny, so two things. One, with the depiction of Darkseid, well, funny to think about it. I think this was probably my first encounter with Darkseid and the new gods.
As a kid.
Yeah.
Yep.
Or at least one of the very earliest, but I think probably the first. So there's that.
I would say that's probably valid for me too, actually, even because I didn't really start. I mean, I read in the early 80s, but mostly Superman books. And there wasn't a lot of Darkseid even in the, like, as you read, there wasn't a ton in the Byrne stuff. There was some, but I was reading a lot of like DC Comics Presents here and there and some Supermans. But then this was probably the earliest Darkseid. I'm like, oh, who's all these people? Like, it was kind of cool to me.
Yeah, man, for sure. And what's funny is that I feel like in more recent incarnations, Darkseid, he's obviously still the ruler of Apocalypse and all of that, but has really been depicted more as this embodiment of evil. Whereas here and in other earlier stories, he really is this alien monarch. And when we get to the annual, for example, and that's hundreds of thousands of years in the past, but still,
I love that. Yeah.
He's about to embark on this arranged marriage.
Yeah. Yes.
To create this strategic alliance. And it's not a context that I typically associate with Darkseid.
Right.
So it's interesting. And I guess in that context, the fact that maybe he's more easily, defeated tracks a little bit more. But I think, like you were saying, I think ultimately what it comes down to, and Jurgens himself talked about this in the interview, show don't tell, right? So it's one thing for us to hear about how powerful Doomsday is. And yes, we've seen him take out the ground troops and everything, but if he's able to go toe to toe with Darkseid, well, that shows you exactly what power level. But in that interview, they talked about, I guess, the backlash at the time. I mean, again, this was all new to me, but yeah, I guess maybe that aspect of it wasn't particularly well received.
Well, and there were some things in here that I could be very wrong about this. I swear, didn't Darkseid call Steppenwolf uncle? And I thought,
oh, was that Step? Maybe I forget.
And yeah, because in that, and I was very taken aback by this too. I'm going to try to find it really fast because I don't really know about all that connections here too. And I see him with Steppenwolf as his best friend. Yeah, he calls him uncle. That's crazy. So it's very interesting, like knowing that, well, like how we view Steppenwolf and like the Zack Snyder stuff and that kind of stuff too. It's like, like that's just an interesting thing. And also how old Darkseid is. Like, what did I say, 145,000 years ago or something like that?
Yeah.
It's like, wait, what's going on? Like, this is quite a long time. So I love that. I loved all of that, all those little like Easter eggs.
Totally. Now, before the Clark and Darkseid stories intersect,
right?
Superman goes to the Linear Men for help. You're not. Yeah, I know you're not a fan. I love the Linear Men.
I love, we're going to talk about this. I love the concept of, and like, I love how they write them. They infuriate me because they're such hypocrites. And some of it doesn't track. I don't understand how they don't understand. Like if they're linear and they say they know the future, I don't understand how things work. It doesn't work in my brain. So we'll talk about that.
No, fair enough. I think since they were there from the beginning for me, I think that's where the attachment comes in. Absent that, I don't know how much I would really gravitate towards those characters, but I did enjoy Superman's frustration towards Wave Rider and Matt Rider over their unwillingness to help, to interfere. Now, of course, Wave Rider will later have a change of heart, and even before that, he throws in the word apocalypse, which Superman initially thinks to mean in the biblical sense, but
it's a pun,
but when he then turns to the Justice League for help and they get this distress call from Desaad, he realizes, I think Wave Rider was giving me a message and I should go to Apocalypse. Now, as I'm reading this, I say to myself, does anyone have like a bigger pair of balls than Desaad? You're asking the Justice League for help?
Yeah. Like and like on. I don't know, everything we know about Darkseid and all of the Apocalypse, like if he learned that Desaad is like Mayday, Justice League, I feel like he'd be like fed to any creature on Apocalypse if Darkseid learned about this.
Yeah, it was crazy to me. I guess it goes to show just how dire the circumstances are, but if to see Apocalypse begging for help was definitely unusual. But of course,
it makes sense though. Like if Darkseid's talking about evacuation and Desaad is like worried, like, why is my master so scared? I got to do anything we can to help. I can see what he's doing, but it was interesting to me. It's also an iteration of the Justice League that I'm not like. This time frame of the Justice League of America is not my favorite either. Because this is also, we've got, I think Maxima is still there. So we see Maxima, Oberon, we have a little bit of Big Barda and Mr. Miracle. I feel like this also has Fire and Ice still, maybe Guy Gardner still, but it's not my favorite. So the Maxima stuff was kind of cool, like that interaction. But then I did make a note, like Superman refuses help. So Maxima offers like, I'll go with you. And he's like, no, something I do by myself. And I was like, why would he not? If he's having nightmares and he's worried about this and he knows the outcome, why wouldn't he say, yeah, come along, please?
That's a very good and valid question. And I think that we can make an argument that, because he knows how dangerous it is, right? He doesn't want to put anyone else at risk. However, it's like, you got to be strategic about what you're doing. So maybe there's a way to try to figure out how to have some backup, but in a way where it's just sort of, all hands on deck situation, only if absolutely necessary, something like that. But, at the end of the day, I think this needed to be a solo mission, but his reasoning for it was a little, although again, now in fairness, he's been down this road before. He's seen what Doomsday can do to this exact version of the Justice League. So
well, that's true. I guess my other question, and we talked about this when we talked about death, like the whole death series itself, is you're all at the funeral, but where were you during the battle?
Right.
So what did we lose their phone numbers at this point? So why at this point, when he knows Doomsday might be back, why did you say, hey, Wonder Woman, Green Lantern Corps, how about you guys meet me on Apocalypse? That's where of course, it makes sense for the arc of the story that it's a Superman story, but we got other heroes that could help, so why not? We see it in Doomsday Wars.
True. Maybe this is an instance of, I don't know, pride's not the right word, but maybe this is an instance of his fallibility. Right. I think the wise choice would be to bring in reinforcements, but he's like, I have to do this myself. So it's not really rational, but I think, again, talking about the relatability and everything, I do think it tracks with his state of mind and this fear. And it's he needs to conquer this himself. And maybe he doesn't feel he'll be able to if he has his reinforcements. Or, who's the one who's offering help? Maxima. He's probably oh God, this one, she's going to want to marry me again. It's a whole thing. Yeah. He's probably it's too much. It's more trouble than it's worth.
Yeah. That is interesting. I don't think of it that way too. It's his nightmare. It's not. So maybe he's thinking, I have to conquer this nightmare.
Maybe too. Now I'm really psychoanalyzing this guy,
right?
But maybe too. Maybe it would be different if they knew Doomsday was on a collision course with Earth.
Oh, that's true.
But it's he's going out, and when he shows up, this is even before he gets the message from Desaad, right?
Right.
So when he shows up, he doesn't know what, if any, threat there is. He's just going out in search of this. So I really feel like he's on a solo quest here.
And that reminds me, and you can look at too, that was one of my favorite pages when he's talking to Desaad, and Desaad is showing what Apocalypse is happening. And then he sees Doomsday for the first time. And the panels of you see the look in his eyes and the dread on Superman's face. If you really think about it, we don't see that. We don't really see dread on his face in comics. It's more of strength and courage and I'll take care of you, or maybe sadness or grief, but we don't see fear. So I got to that point. I was like, oh, this is cool. I forgot about this. So I made a note of that too. So how did you remember that? Did you pause?
Yeah. that definitely struck me. And look, I'll argue against myself here. I think this is an argument for the continued utilization of Doomsday, because who else can conjure that sort of reaction from Superman? Because any other threat he goes up against, new or old, he's not really fearing death. Whereas with Doomsday, he's been down that road. He knows what that possibility is. So that definitely registered. Like I said, the fear that you see in this character throughout the story and how he ultimately overcomes it, right? It's not something that he succumbs to and he's defeated. He's able to rise above it. And of course he ends up with this incredible hunter-prey battle armor. So there's so much stuff, fun stuff going on. But the fact that he has his fear and he works his way through. But when he, that's the thing between the words and in particular the art in that scene. You feel what he's feeling when he sees Doomsday on that screen. And I did, to ask about my reaction, I did take a step back and think about what that would feel like for him.
Yeah.
Given this unbelievable trauma that he went through.
Right.
And again, when he's going out in search of answers, he's not expecting this necessarily.
No.
Right. So I don't know, I guess the thing that I kept thinking of was oh my, you gave it, you gave your life for nothing. Now it's not for nothing. He stopped Doomsday for a time and he saved the city, but it's to have made that sort of sacrifice and then to have to potentially make it again, like,
yeah,
amazing.
Like he thought there was a period at the end of the sentence, and it was more like a ... which is really frightening. Yeah, I kind of like this side because, again, we want to be able to relate, like you said earlier. Oh, Superman's not relatable. No, like we're finally getting the chance to see like him be one of us. And what would it look like? It was like mental kryptonite.
Yeah.
You know, like we see so much of the things that can physically hurt him. We don't get a whole lot of mental. And he's, later in Doomsday Wars, we're seeing him deal with Cat Grant's son, which we'll talk about soon. But that's another form of, like, he doesn't have many failures in his life, but like death could be a failure if you think about it. He's afraid to die again and leave people without safety or help. But yeah, like I really resonated and tracked with what Jurgens was trying to do with, like, okay, let's see a different side of Superman.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And well, real quick, let me ask, how did you feel about Superman not just not leaving Darkseid to die, but actively saving him via Mother Box and sort of carrying him to safety when he finds Darkseid lying there? I mean, look, he's Superman. Of course, he's not going to leave him to die. But I was like, oh man, buddy, like, just
like you had an out.
Yeah.
Nobody would have faulted you.
It's like you don't have to save him.
But he's Superman.
He's Superman. Look, I'm going to quote Smallville for a second. Always go back. Always hold on to Smallville. Damn it.
That's right, baby.
But there's a moment in the that episode we've talked about previously, Nemesis, where Lex and Clark are in the mines. Before Clark goes in, Chloe says to him, she's like, you don't get to choose who you save, not when you're Clark Kent. It's like, that's the thing. It's who he is. It's who he is. I can respect that. Yeah. But for a second there, I'm like, oh man, you had your out.
Yeah, it's nice for us to go like, what are you thinking? And then, but we wait to go, oh, that's right. We're reading this because he's the best of us.
But, and he, like, credit to Jurgens, he has Clark go through the same thought process.
Oh yeah. Like, should I just leave him here? Like, yeah, I mean, I thought that was kind of cool. There's been some writers lately, actually, and I forget who did it. There's been these Tales of the Dark Multiverse stories that have been come out recently, and they kind of reanalyze and reimagine some stories. There was a neat one, I think it was War of the Gods, where Darkseid and Wonder Woman have a relationship. It's very interesting, and it's a cool, like, look at what we don't see that Darkseid feels, because he has to be Darkseid. It was very interesting. You should check it out.
Oh, that calls to mind Super Friends, where he was obsessed with Wonder Woman and tried to force her into marriage.
I you know what? I didn't go down that door, that hallway like you did. I tried watching a few Super Friends after that episode, and it was I wasn't forced to do that for a podcast, so I stopped.
Poor
I watched
Super
a few.
Friends.
I was like, okay, that's enough.
So we find out through Desaad that Doomsday has been boom tubed away to this planet called Caladan, which is the one place second place after Earth, where Doomsday had been defeated previously. And before Superman takes off, I think it is before, right, that he gets the download of the origin.
Yeah, Wave Rider shares everything with him, right?
Except the planet where Doomsday was recreated.
Except for the one important part.
But to your point, like, we will get that later in the final battle in Hunter Prey. We do get this final piece of the puzzle that Doomsday was created on Krypton. Now, again, we've talked about sort of the mechanics of Doomsday's creation earlier in this episode. But again, going back to my potential misgivings with this, first, I'll say this. As much as part of me thinks it would be really cool if Doomsday's origins remained a mystery, and I do think there's something to be said for that. However, just due to the nature of comics and publishing and all these adaptations, that would never hold. So at some point, the story would be told. And I do think it's fitting that Jurgens was the one who was able to do it. And again, I think he did do it with integrity. And so if we have to get an origin, this idea of this forced evolution through these horrific genetic experiments, I think that's a very compelling take, and it does imbue the character with, like I said before, like some element of tragedy. You're not sympathizing or empathizing, but at the same time, it's, I guess you understand like where the character is coming from, why his only directive is survive and kill and destroy. The fact that all of those deaths and rebirths, they say like those memories are now part of his genetic makeup.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that's not even so much of a misgiving. I think, it certainly works as an origin story. And if we have to have one, I don't know what would really necessarily be better per se.
I would agree. I mean, you talk about like in social work and psychology and other things, like if you find a criminal or somebody struggling with like severe like psychosis or psychopath, there's always, you could track it back to something, some sort of abuse. There's a story behind that. The more we talk about it, the more I need a story, because I don't think like, we need to explain why this creature exists, and as in its existence, it kills. Like, we don't find a lot of that in comics, where like, oh, it's just a bad guy because it's bad. Like, that's not a thing. There's a reason. So, I mean, and that goes with people, and it goes with Doomsday, I guess, too. I'd rather go, oh, that's a messed up story. That makes sense. I mean, yeah, he should kill everything. like that tracks now for me for some reason. So,
and I'm coming around on this because I'm not a geneticist, so I don't know if the science really tracks here, but at least on paper in this comic book world, it made sense. Like it was a reasonable explanation for how powerful this creature is and how adaptable the creature is. And, that was something that I think you saw even more in this story, was how anytime something would, would wound him and then it would seal right up. And they talked about how he's like solid inside. Like there's even minimal, like liquid in his body. Like he's a solid mass.
Well, yeah, I think in Doomsday Wars, even when the Justice League is fighting, there's some really cool things there where like, I feel like there was a sonic thing or a sound and his ears like closed up and like all different defenses that he just does. I was like, what is happening? So it was cool.
I think that's actually Hunter Prey, because I think that's one of the weapons that he has.
Maybe part 3? Oh, the Sonic. Yeah. Let's see how you do with Sonics. And then it's like chunk.
And his ears close up. Yeah. So I think the story really did a great job of showing that. So now I guess going to my other misgiving, which probably won't be a misgiving by the time we're done having this conversation, is that Krypton is his planet of origin.
Right.
And I guess why maybe it's a misgiving is just, I think there's something, we talked about this. There's something very pure about the fact that Superman is killed by Doomsday, this creature that arrives out of nowhere and is just this destructive force. We talked about how it would have felt cheapened, right, if it had been a plot by Luthor or Brainiac or something like that. Like they got one over on him. But it was this force of nature. And I guess that still holds true. I mean, this origin doesn't undermine that, but the fact that Doomsday specifically sought Superman out because he's Kryptonian, I feel like, I don't know, it sort of undermines a little bit of that force of nature out of nowhere bit.
Yeah. I mean, why was he going? I mean, I think when he came out of Earth, like when he was buried and came out, he was just on a rampage because he's like, I'm a destructive force. We see it over 150,000 years he's been doing this. So it's just a new place where he gets to kill a deer and squeeze a bird. I mean, it's like, I think then all of a sudden it was when he sees Superman. Like, did you remind me if you read Injustice yet?
I have not read. Injustice? I've only still watched the movie.
Oh yeah, we talked about that. So there's a point where I think Joker uses like a scarecrow gas on Superman to make him think Lois is Doomsday. So he like takes up to space and ultimately is killing Lois. Like when Wave Rider goes into Doomsday's head and sees that Doomsday sees Superman, but is instead of seeing Superman, sees Bertron. So like, same rules apply. Like, oh my gosh, this guy is disgusting. He destroyed me. Like he killed me for 30 years over and over again. I'm angry. So like, again, we don't want to sympathize with Doomsday, but now you kind of go, oh, all right, that makes sense. Like, and that's an important thing for Clark to know. Like, he's not just coming after you because he hates you. There's eons of him hating you because he thinks you're his creator.
Yes.
I liked that a lot, actually. I thought it was cool.
No, I hear you. I guess the one other thing that I'm bumping up against is, I don't, right. One of the arguments against Superman in the fictional world is that he brings these threats to Earth, right? Enemies are attacking because they're trying to get to him, and elements of Krypton are at play because of him. And so I guess there was something, again, that I liked about the fact that this wasn't his quote unquote fault.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that now, it is his fault, but I like that idea that this was just something that happened. And
it's coincidence. It really is coincidence, because all those thousands of years ago, they didn't know he was going to be there.
True.
It kind of bothered me a little bit. It's like, why you gotta why are you shooting your garbage? You killed Doomsday with the Radiant. You wrap him up in your stuff. Could you bury him on your own planet? Like, why you got to shoot him off? And now it's Earth's problem.
I know. No, that was frustrating. But, so again, I guess I just like that idea that this wasn't a Kryptonian problem that followed him to Earth.
Yeah, exactly right. Because that happens in Man of Steel. That happens in a lot of reiterations of, like, even in the animated series when Apocalypse comes, like that kind of stuff too.
Exactly. At the same time, once we are getting an origin for Doomsday, and I do think that this is an effective one, it has to be Krypton. Otherwise, it doesn't really pack a punch. Like, I recognize that. Once you set this up, and I do, Jurgens could have given us the piece about Krypton at that point, but he held it for the third part, which
is good.
And it's
good writing.
It was a great reveal, and look, now we knew where it was going, but to be reading it at the time, I mean, I don't know how obvious that was to people. Maybe they figured they were going to go there, but maybe not. I think there were at least some who were surprised reading it the first time.
I'll be honest. When I first read it, I remember just going like, oh, that's crazy. Like, a scientist and his group of scientists on a planet did this. And then it's the dun, dun, dun. And you're like, oh my gosh, it's Krypton. I thought that was cool. I thought that was a good writing trope that we use. Like, oh, good. We saved it where it shocks the listener instead of just, let's tell them everything now and then it's done.
Yeah, it works, and it's this very interesting blend. I got, again, tip my hat to Jurgens because it feels both. There's that element of surprise, but it's also kind of inevitable. Like I said, it's like, I feel like for this to have any weight, like, it has to be Krypton. So,
it has to, yeah.
And I do think that this choice here, maybe other adaptations would have landed on a Kryptonian origin either way. But I think, this sort of set the stage for other versions that we would get, even though they put different spins on them. But again, in Batman v Superman, it's this Kryptonian abomination. Going back to Smallville, it was a Kryptonian weapon, and they used Zod and Feora's DNA to create, this weapon. So, regardless of how you feel about other takes on it, I mean, it all sort of comes from there. And I think, we have gotten good mileage out of it in other areas. So, yeah, all in all, I'm on board. It's not like, and you know what though, but like I said at the top, even if I still am like, maybe he could have remained a mystery, this story was still worth it. And we still haven't even gotten to the coolest part, right? Because he shows up on this Calatan planet. I guess he fights Doomsday for a bit, and his costume is, he's not having an easy time here.
No, yeah.
And the mother box reconstitutes the costume. And you know what again, Jurgens tied everything together nicely. Superman mentions to Wave Rider how what he's wearing is still technically the black recovery suit, right? Which was torn to shreds in Coast City. And then Matrix Supergirl used her powers to rearrange the molecules and create all this additional thread and create his costume. And that's still what he's wearing. And then Mother Box further reconstitutes that into this hunter-prey armor.
I love it. Okay. This is going to be very conspiracy of me. I also a little bit wonder. I'm literally sitting looking at the Hunter Prey action figure. So a little bit in the back of my head, do you ever wonder if Kenner and DC were talking about stuff a little bit more? Like, we'd like to start an action figure line. Can you start doing some stuff where we have different versions of Superman? And because I'm looking at the action figure, it is one of the most badass figures ever. Like I'm looking across all of them, and that one always just sticks out. I so desperately wish it came with that sword. Like, you punk, you're looking at it right now. Yeah.
Okay.
And you're looking maybe this is a good time to talk about the toys. You're looking at the carded ones.
So this toy line, so I echo everything you say. I think, it's one of those things. Was it just a toy line based on this comic, or was there some collaboration? I think there's, I wouldn't be shocked if there were. So this is Kenner's Man of Steel action figure line from 1995. Now,
it's great.
They ended up doing, sadly, only 2 series of the regular action figures. There were also deluxe figures. There were a couple of combo packs, and there were also some vehicles. And this line holds a very special place for me because these were the first Superman action figures that I had and I played with. Like, I played with these action figures as a kid. Now, sadly, the ones that I had are long gone, parted with either in a garage sale or at my comic shop. At a certain point, I remember bringing in just a box of loose action figures to the comic book store and $1 a piece, and I sold them.
How dare you, Anthony?
But within the past year, I went on eBay.
Good.
And I got good prices. I have to say they're not that crazy. So if anyone's curious and you want to pick up any of these, they're relatively affordable on eBay. They were the original price sticker is still on here. They were $5.99 back in the day.
God, remember how good that was?
Oh man. So yeah, especially now with a kid who we get toys for, it's like, that would be great. Yeah. So I ended up buying not all of them, but the key ones. Unfortunately, I haven't yet pulled the trigger on the Hunter Prey Doomsday 2-pack, which I know probably seems like blasphemy, but I went with the single figures first. So from the first wave, we have Power Flight Superman, so our traditional red and blue costume, but with the long hair. And that's, other than the timing, that's why, we're talking about it in this episode. This was a line that really took a tremendous amount of inspiration from the death and reign of Superman.
It's great. Is that the Power Flight Superman right there?
This is the Power Flight Superman, so traditional Superman with the long hair. We also have, this is probably the nearest and dearest to me, the Laser Superman with supercharged laser cannon. This is the black suited Superman.
It's so great. And it comes with a big gun, I think, too.
Yes.
Yep.
It does. And then, of course, we have, not of course, because there are a couple of characters who never made it here. So it's not of course. You can't take anything for granted.
There's no Cyborg, which really makes me angry. Oh. It's the killer, man.
So we also have Steel and Superboy. And I picked up both of those. And of course, I also picked up from Wave 1. And boy, wait till we get a couple episodes deeper into this event. I've been talking about this for 2 years now. We're getting here. Kenny Braverman, baby. Conduit.
Kenny Braverman.
The most underrated Superman villain of the 90s, maybe even all time. I know people are like, what is this guy talking about? You know what's funny? I haven't done my reading yet for those upcoming episodes. I might walk back some of this, but from what I remember, I think he's a cool character.
No, he's a cool character. There's a lot of cool backstory.
And he has the spinning kryptonite attack cables. It's
awesome.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that was Wave 1. So I did pick up all of those. Now, on the back of the card here, they also advertised the two packs, the Superman Hunter Prey and Doomsday, and Superman and Massacre, who was a villain who would come into play around this time as well. I had both of those as a kid.
Yep.
But again, I have not picked those up again. And then as far as vehicles go from this first wave, we have the Superboy Cycle, the VTOL Cycle. And I read on that website I sent you what that stands for, and I can't remember now. It's like vertical takeoff or something?
Vertical takeoff and landing.
Okay.
Yeah.
So at least from this, you sent me a picture. I know you have most, if not all of these, right?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. yeah. And they're all loose. The really cool thing is if you dig deep into that site, and I didn't see it on there actually. There was a mail away that it's so hard to find, but there's a conversion coupe.
Oh yeah.
And I think it came with the car. But it's Clark Kent.
Yes.
So it's Clark Kent with the ponytail. It's not long hair. He's got a ponytail. And the way the car works is you can put the cockpit slides back. So you can put Superman in the back of it and Clark Kent in the front, and then it moves. So it looks like they're transforming from one to the other. And it was a great toy.
Awesome. So now moving on to wave 2, which was sadly as far as we got with this line. Now, here's where it all falls apart.
Yep.
So interestingly and excitingly, and I did pick this one up. This is the one I'm holding. Wave 2 did include a Lex Luthor. Mm-hmm. And what's interesting about it is it's a very like battle ready Lex Luthor.
It does not make sense whatsoever for this Lex Luthor.
He's got all these weapons, and he's like this tight black t-shirt and open vest, and it does not at all match the post-crisis version of Lex we've been dealing with. And
it's got these like spiky spear things that go on his hands, I think, too. It's weird.
Yes. Now, as I learned recently, this was short packed. See, I'm not up on the action figure lingo, but this was short pack. And that makes sense because I don't remember ever even seeing this. I never owned this.
It was like one per case. So there would be like 3 Supermans, like 3 of, I think maybe like the other laser one. And then they would put like 1 of some of them.
Yeah.
Like the street, I have the Street Guardian Superman too, the black leather trench coat. Oh, that's so great.
Okay. So on that note, so the rest of Wave 2 almost entirely consisted of these variations of Superman. So there's Solar Suit Superman, Street Guardian Superman, and Ultra Shield Superman. And that's where, look, I guess, especially if the first line didn't sell that well, they figure lean more into Superman. I get it. But, it breaks my heart that we didn't get Cyborg. We didn't get Eradicator. We'll come back to that in a second.
Yeah. Or Supergirl.
Like,
there's no females in the whole line.
Yeah, I mean, they started off great. I mean, having Superboy, having Steel Conduit. I mean, that's looking back, it feels like a deep cut. At the time, I mean, he was prevalent in the comics, but still, not a slam dunk. So it's so disappointing that was the direction they ended up going. Although, as I'm looking at Street Guardian Superman here,
and that's off the Elseworlds. They went into the Elseworlds comic.
Yes, but as I'm looking at it, so I don't own any of those variations. I feel like, with a minimal paint job, you could turn this into Clark from season 9 of Smallville. This could be because we've got the black trench coat.
I agree. I forgot about that.
I think all we have to do is paint that the blue shirt black and the S symbol gray, and we're good to go. So
do it.
I might be ordering that one. I say that as if I have any ability to actually paint this myself, but I could enlist somebody.
Now, if you are going to go onto the hunt for some of the hard to find things in this line, I would strongly suggest you start with the Kryptonian battle suit.
You and I are speaking the same language because that was literally the next thing I was going to say. So, we're talking about these vehicles, right? And there's the Superboy cycle, there's the car for Clark, and
it's so great.
They did the purple Kryptonian battle suit
it's amazing.
That carried Kal-El from the fortress to Metropolis in the black recovery suit. I had it as a kid. Oh. I can't tell you how much I wish I had held on to that. That is one of the ones that does go for a bit more on eBay. So I have not investigated that fully yet.
Yeah. Yeah, man. When you sent me like, hey, can we talk about this? I was like, yes. That is, so we can blame that Kenner toy line, and the Kenner vintage Star Wars toy line for I will call it a healthy addiction to the action figures that are surrounding me right now. It's ridiculous. But that is the first real toy line I ever bought as an adult. It's like, I'd like to have these figures. It was awesome.
I know recently McFarlane has brought back the Superpowers line. It's a Walmart exclusive. I don't know how likely this line is to get a revival. And I mean, I have most of them now, so I guess it doesn't matter that much. But it was, this one, like yourself, but for different reasons. I mean, it really holds a special place. And I think back to all the time, and look, only child over here. I mean, I spent a lot of time like playing with action figures, but creating stories with them. And so I always think about, what I've done with documentaries and podcasts, like it's, different kinds of stories, but I just think back to like creating those scenarios and everything. And I treasure that time that I spent doing it and with those figures. So I'm so glad that I picked up the ones that I did. It's a great line. I mean, even if you just look up photos of the figures, I think it's worthwhile.
And I do have an alarm in my phone for tomorrow that I will be going to the UPS store to send you your Eradicator.
So
listeners,
one of the unreleased figures was Eradicator. So like we were saying, they were getting there. Like, I mean, I never saw any photos or anything about Cyborg, but I would have to imagine that was at least in consideration at some point. But there was this unreleased, unproduced Eradicator figure that then later became a Toy Fair mail away exclusive, right? And you so kindly, so generously, you picked one up for me, I don't know, months ago at this point.
Yeah, it was months ago. I was at a Comic-Con. I was like, I wonder if Anthony has this. And I just took a picture and sent it to you. You're like, yeah, no, please.
So no
and
rush.
It was $10. It was $10. That was the best part about it. I was like, what? Yeah. So you'll be happy.
Whenever it arrives, I am excited to get it, but no pressure. But yeah, man, that's the Kenner line. And anyway, so tying this back to Hunter Prey, I mean, for anyone who somehow, if you never read the comic, you never saw the action figure, you never saw a photo, how do you describe the Hunter Prey outfit to someone?
It's got this, like, I don't know. My brain automatically goes to like Trojan Warrior. It's got like golden sashes and belts and things you're holding, sword holsters and all this other kind of stuff on it. I love it. Like it's just a great, and it's got like you know what it looks like too. For those that just like who know who Hercules is in the Marvel universe, like the way Hercules looks, he's got like the head, kind of like the headgear where his face shows and then his hair's coming out the top. I also kind of liked it because it got rid of the long hair for a little while.
I know. I was thinking about that too.
I was like, oh, short hair again. We're good.
Yeah, it was a cool look. I mean, it's very 90s. It's, you know, you get the belt and the pouches and the armor. And what's funny, at first I was like, this looks like more cosmetic. Like it, you know, but then he starts, you know, pulling out the weapons like the sword and the sonic blaster. I'm like, all right, I get on board with this. And this was, again, the Mother Box created this for him. So it gave him a little, he leveled up.
It looks a little bit, for those listening, like if you know anything about Deathstroke the Terminator, it looks like that outfit a little bit. But if it was a Superman costume, it's kind of cool.
Yeah. Well, the other thing I liked, and, you know, Jurgens, you know, he repeated this in the Rebirth story where Superman fought Doomsday, but he started it here of, you know, Clark fighting smarter against Doomsday, learning his lesson. You know, he specifically says, like, I can't go toe to toe, punch for punch with him. Like, I have to keep a distance. I have to use my other powers. Yeah. So I did it. It's like, all right, you know, you like to see some evolution. You like to see some strategy. You know, he still has an exceedingly difficult time. I did like when he, you know, flew away and then he built up a lot of speed and he hit Doomsday. Like, he was fighting, again, smarter than, not want to say smarter than he usually does, but it was just, I think it was a level of strategy that he doesn't often need to use.
No. Well, and then of course Doomsday figures it out and he's like throwing boulders at him from the ground, and even Superman's like, oh my gosh, he's still able to fight me from the ground
and continuing to evolve. I mean, those knuckle bones, like he's able to
he like shoots it out like
them.
And it sticks in his shoulder and he pulls him down from the air. It was great.
It's a pretty vicious fight, and ultimately the path to victory is with the aid of, you know, Wave Rider's time travel device, bringing Doomsday to the end of time, where entropy engulfs all. Nah, not a fan.
I'm not a fan of that one. So that's where I was not looking forward to talking to the end of the story, because they do this in Doctor Who? They do this here. Like, when is the end of time? Like what? When is that? Like, what is that? Is that even a thing? We can kind of talk about the beginning of time, but it just, that was the only thing, Anthony, that I was like, that's a little bit of a cop out. Like, I get it. It makes sense. It's clever, but I'm going, so when is that? Like, do we know what happens? Like, what happens right before the end of time? So I don't know. I don't love it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a contrivance. I mean, look, we get a more physical version of it with the source wall, right? We've had instances where it's like, okay, that's how we deal with someone. We throw them at the source walls. Okay. We had, at the end of Our Worlds at War, you know, Superman brought Imperiex and Brainiac 13 to the beginning of time, to the Big Bang.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, obviously this came first, but
it's okay.
What?
I'm being picky. I know we live in it's a comic book universe, but I'm like, all right, can we at least pretend physics exists? Like,
I know. Here's the thing. I mean, having Wave Rider there, I felt at least that made some sense, and that gave him a reason to be there. I mean, obviously he provides crucial information, but it's like, okay, that ties in the time travel aspect. And then also, I mean, I have to imagine at this point in time, Jurgens was building towards 0 hour, so maybe that's why that was on the mind. And then, of course, that will come into play in Doomsday Wars when we find out how Doomsday survived that. But, so you leave Superman Doomsday Hunter Prey, and it seems like Doomsday is done for good.
He's gone. Yeah, you think he's gone. I get a little snarky about Wave Rider just because Wave Rider says he can see the past, present, and the future. So I guess I don't fully understand. Like, wouldn't he be able to see that he was going to have to do this? Like, if he can see the future, doesn't he know how we get out of this? Like, so like, if he says he's not going to get involved, but he could see the future, like, does that track? Like, it does. That's to me like a paradox. Like, if we say he can see the future, well, then what the hell? Tell us what happens. So I don't know. I get pissy.
Yeah, I don't know. That's that
maybe I care too much about that, I guess.
No, I mean, I get what you're saying. I think that's a tough nut to crack. It might be a little bit more palatable if he was just like, I don't know, I can't see beyond the fixed point or something like that. And okay, like that gives us a little more wiggle room.
They do that in certain time shows like Doctor Who. They say like that's a fixed point in time, or the future might not be fully written yet. We don't always know. I'd rather say that. So, but. We'll get to Doomsday Wars in a second. And honestly, I did like Doomsday Wars as well, but at the same time, I think the reasons I liked Doomsday Wars had next to nothing to do with Doomsday for the most part. So much so that I think I'm on board with Hunter Prey being because I think it has a specific story to tell. It gives you the origin with Doomsday. It gives you the rematch. You got to have a rematch at some point, and it really takes Clark on a journey. I think they probably should have stopped there. Yeah. So should we talk at all about how the Doomsday Annual is really just a transition? Kind of. They're 2 years apart, but from the annual to this new story. But it at least kind of sets up why Doomsday gets to Earth and what happens. So it's just to kind of summarize it for people if you don't want to read it or not. It's just, it returns to like, we get to see Mitch again, which is cool. So it's Mitch and other survivors talking about the Doomsday battle and how it affected their lives. We see young Darkseid. We see the planet, like all the Kund, like that. That is kind of cool. Green Lantern deals with it, and we go back to Calaton. And there's this kind of cheesy He-Man, G.I. Joe moral at the end of the story, kind of last page of, if you stick together against tyranny and justice, we win. And that's it. So it just brings us to then a little history about Doomsday, and then we come to Doomsday Wars.
I appreciate. Thank you for doing that. I really appreciate that, because usually as host, like I gotta break everything down. But thank you.
Yeah, it's like, let's just get through it. Just so if you're listening, that's fine.
I mean, I don't have a ton to say about it. To your point, it definitely shows you how Doomsday earned his reputation, right? It fills in those gaps, because in Hunter Prey, you get him leaving Krypton. Yep. And then you ultimately see his defeat on Calaton at the hands of Radiant. Yeah. This energy being. And then he's sent to Earth. But this shows you what happens in between. I mean, it is a bit after school, especially about how, sacrifice and working together. Like, just as an example, the Green Lantern vignette is ultimately the Guardian who sacrifices himself. And that's able to subdue Doomsday temporarily. I think the thing I liked the most was seeing Mitch. And also this idea that the victims, like all the people who were in the path of Doomsday's destruction, are gathering at the site where he emerged to try to find some answers, to try to have some moment of healing. I like that. I thought that was a neat bit there. So that was probably my favorite part of that annual.
Yeah, I mean, if you're in a shop and you see it in like a $1 or $2 box, whatever, pick it up. The cover's awesome. If you love Doomsday, the cover's great. but I think it does fill in some cool gaps, and that's really all you need to know about it.
Yeah, for sure. So, all right, that brings us to the Doomsday War. So now flash forward to 98. Now, again, folks, over the upcoming episodes, we're diving back fully into the Triangle Era, the end of 93, 94, 95, 96. We're going death through wedding here.
Yeah.
So we're skipping ahead a little bit to cover the Doomsday Wars. But again, we're gonna go back and fill in everything else.
The tone of this really does lead into some really important stuff between Pete, Lana, Clark. Like, it's very interesting. You see some different dynamics, like going into President Lex and beyond this, where Pete's vice president and a lot of different stuff in that dynamic. So this is actually an important read, but I kind of want to hear a little of your take first before I share with you mine. Like, we've talked a little bit about it, but like, what was your positive takeaway from this?
Sure. So the Doomsday piece of it is, long story short, Brainiac's mind inhabits Doomsday's body. So you got this combination of brains and brawn. And as a kid reading this, I thought that was pretty cool. I think that was the lasting memory that I had. Reading it now, it's okay. It didn't really light my fire, but it definitely appealed to me more as a kid. But what really grabbed me now was, again, the character work. And it really, in both the past, the flashback sequences, and the present, really does focus on this relationship among Pete, Clark, and Lana. And, you know, you see the sacrifice that Clark is willing to make for Lana and for the baby that she and Pete have had prematurely, who's in rough condition. So that was a part of it. And just like Hunter Prey was, you know, Clark in that story was driven by the fear that he had. Here, similarly, going back to what you were saying before, is the guilt. It's the guilt over not having saved Cat grandson. And we're going to talk about that in our next episode.
Yeah.
And not wanting to repeat that with Pete and Lana's kid. And that is the heart of this story. And that's why it works for me. The Doomsday piece of it, I could kind of take your leave. But the guilt and the lengths he goes to for his friends, it really resonated.
You said something earlier that made me kind of wonder if Doomsday Wars would be a great story without Doomsday.
Yeah.
Like I actually think you could somehow have a creature or something that's not Doomsday that Brainiac takes over. Because actually all the Brainiac stuff's kind of cool. And we don't, in this era, if you think past this era in the 2000s, Jeff Johns takes over, and the Brainiac that we know is very different. Mm-hmm. It's a little different look and approach and vibe. This is still the Coluan Brainiac that goes all the way back to kind of Milton Fine and dealing with the stuff we've talked about in the past, which is kind of cool. But it's amazing you said that, because I don't always think of this as a Doomsday story. Like, it is a Doomsday story, but the things that I gravitate to are like Clark going out of his way to try to deal with this terrible thing while he's protecting the young baby. It's learning about how the Kents dealt with that traumatic event and how the community rallies around them because they are the Kents, you know, and who they are and how you help one another. And everybody brought a cow from the entire community to like rebuild the herd. Like, there's this awesome character, humanity pieces of this story that are really, really worth reading.
Well said. I'm totally with you. Yeah, that's the thing. It's, you see in this story instances where Clark has failed. He failed Cat Grant. And, you know, again, that'll be the next episode. I haven't read it yet. I'm dreading reading that issue.
You've never read that issue?
No, I read it when I was a kid, and I do remember it, but I've not reread it since. And
it's sad. Like, it's hard.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really not looking forward to reading it, but I like that Jurgens at least dealt with it. And because again, I'll be able to answer this after I've reread this era very shortly, but I don't, beyond the immediate aftermath, I don't know how often Cat's loss was really brought up or dealt with. So the fact that it's acknowledged here and that you see it's something that's still eating away at Clark.
Yeah. A year later.
A year later. Although there's a little goof, because in a subsequent issue, Clark says something about like years ago. So I think the timeline. But anyway. Yeah. So, you know, and then again, going back to those flashback sequences in Smallville where the town is hit by this huge blizzard, and Clark is trying to get to the cattle and herd them in, get them out of the storm, and Clark and Pete and Lana just can't make it through the snow.
Yeah.
And, Pete has to really kind of talk him down. Like, look, like and this, Clark doesn't have his powers yet at this point in the story.
Right.
And he's like, we're not going to make it. And ultimately they don't make it and the cattle die. And he's, when he sees Pa's reaction to that dead herd, I mean, it just, it's rough and you feel for the character. And so again, going back to the relatability, it's like, you always think of Superman as winning, and yeah, most times he does, but not always. And he never forgets those times that he doesn't.
So, question for you. Are we sure Clark doesn't have his powers yet? Do they say that in the story?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. And I also feel like I don't think he would have let keeping the secret stop him in that instance.
And I wondered that, like, because there's a few panels where like it's him with them and he's standing by himself and it's like just him by himself and another one by himself. It's almost like he's thinking, can I do this? Like, can I fix this? So I was questioning myself going like, does he have his powers? And he just can't do anything because they're all together. He can't let them know that. I wondered though. So maybe you're right.
I'm almost positive that in one of his inner monologues, he's talking about not having his powers yet.
Okay. Yeah. I'll go back and look.
But then, in the present day, it turns out that Pete and Lana, who, are married at this point, right. They have been pregnant. They haven't told Clark.
Yeah.
And they've gotten into a car accident and Lana's in the hospital and the baby was delivered prematurely and is in rough shape. And the Smallville hospital is really not equipped. And so, Lana calls Clark in right at the same time that he's getting this distress call from the Justice League who are dealing with Doomsday. Fair enough. Jurgens, kind of builds up like, who are they actually fighting? It's like, it's called Doomsday Wars. I mean, but all right, he doesn't drag it out. He doesn't drag it out too long, in fairness.
Yeah.
And the scenes with Clark and Lana in the hospital, I mean, they really struck a chord where she's like, I've never asked you, like, I've kept your secret. I've never asked you for anything. I'm calling it all in now. Like, I need you to get my baby to a hospital that can help him.
That was pretty awesome, actually, because you think about that. You're like, listen, that's a big ask that she's had to deal with knowing this secret and has never done anything. I found that pretty valid. I found that very like, yeah, you get to call an audible here and go, I need you to do this for me. No one else can do this for me. And no one will ask a question because you're just helping somebody.
Right.
Yeah,
exactly.
It was pretty interesting reading the tone between like Pete to Lana about her relationship with Clark.
Well, because Pete doesn't understand, like, why are you kicking me out of this room? Why do you have to talk to Clark in secret? Yeah. What is this about? And then, of course they play it as, Clark's friends with Superman and which, number one, let me say that having done all the reading that I did, last year, it definitely it enriched all of this, right? Yes. Getting that backstory and seeing, going back to Superman number 2.
Yeah.
When Lex kidnaps and brutally tortures Lana for information about Superman. It's like she's been through a lot. I mean, the love story aside, she's been through a lot.
Yes.
The stuff with Pete, I mean, how do you feel about the fact that they continue to keep Pete in the dark about who Clark is?
I think it sucks. Like, I actually think too, like, that Lana's now married to Pete. You should be able to trust Pete enough if you love him enough to marry him, and he has a relationship with Clark already. Why would you not tell him? I think that's what always frustrated me with that triangle, because that actually it could definitely, if you wait too long, create a rift. Now it's like, well, you've lied to me for all these years and we've been married. I think that's actually more harmful than not just telling him.
I agree. I think they really do Pete dirty in this. I don't think anyone comes out looking great. And no. I think, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. It's not, it'd be bad enough if Pete were a stranger, Correct. But you can make a little bit more of an argument. But, and that's the thing, the story goes out of its way to show you this bond that they've had since childhood. It's like, yes. Why would Clark not want to tell his friend Pete? And beyond that, even if it's not his preference, right? You're putting allegedly your best friend, an oldest friend, Lana, in a really difficult position of lying to her husband. I don't like that. I mean, obviously it creates tension, but I feel like you would have the tension anyway, because Pete knows the history.
Yeah.
And he knows how Lana has felt about Clark in the past. So I feel like most of this could still kind of play out the same anyway.
Yeah.
So I feel like that adds an unnecessary layer. I don't I really think that's unfair to the character of Pete. I felt frustrated reading that.
Well, and there's a really powerful part where Pete like breaks his hand on punching Superman because he's so mad that Superman doesn't know where his son is. He basically gets thrown out of plane by Doomsday / Brainiac. Pete sees him after coming off the plane. Is like, "Where's my son?" And he has no answer. And he just like launches into him. It's like, and everybody's like, "Is everybody okay?" No, you should take care of Pete. Don't worry about me. He broke his hand. Make sure he's okay.
I know they're like, "You want us to get this guy, Superman?"
Yeah,
no, that's all right.
Yes, they got Superman 2 like sticks and rocks ready. Like,
I know, because right at this point in the story, so Brainiac's body, the Milton Fine body, right, has been destroyed.
Right.
But the consciousness has been preserved and implanted in Doomsday, but that won't hold, right? Doomsday's force is just too strong. So
right.
So Brainiac and his Kaluan servant, right? They're trying to create a new form for him, and basically they need organic material to then splice it with Doomsday DNA and create like this new like truly mindless version of Doomsday that Brainiac will be able to inhabit. I mean, a little bit convoluted, but that's the gist of it. That's why why they take the baby.
And that's kind of messed up too. It's like, so we're just gonna like ditch the baby after we like take some genetic material. Where it's like, boop, baby's dead. That was also kind of dark too. It's like, whoa, they're just gonna steal the baby. Okay.
Yeah. Although it ended up working out well for the Rosses because the device that they place baby Ross in is able to bring him to, sort of heal him and bring him to the state that he would have been in if he hadn't been born prematurely. So,
okay,
there's that.
Something I'm curious about how if you caught this, there's like a weird hole or I don't know whether it's a purposeful continuity issue, but how does Pete not get that Clark is Superman? Because there's a point where Clark has his shirt off and he's wearing the Superman tights and the red boots, and Pete calls him Clark.
Yeah.
And then later, all is fixed, everybody's happy. Clark still has his shirt off and he's wearing the exact same pants, and Pete calls him Superman. I'm like, okay, what the hell? Was that like, I wonder, did you notice that? Was that like a oopsie? Like, I don't get that.
Yeah, I did clock that. I don't know. I don't have a good answer for that. Yeah, I don't know.
Like, no, Pete doesn't go, Clark, why are you wearing blue tights? It's just odd.
I mean, I guess in that initial moment he was disoriented and right. Adrenaline was pumping.
It caught me as like a ooh. Like, I think we might have missed this in script supervision or something. Well,
and it's like maybe that could have been the moment for Pete to learn.
Right, and that's what I was hoping. Like, just tell him, especially right then when like everything's resolved. Just tell him, like, bring him into and then that would be an awesome way. The trust is formed. Then we name the baby Clark. Right. Like, that makes more sense.
I know. Well, like you said, I mean, this definitely sets up the dynamic as we head into the 2000s and President Luthor and Pete being vice president and the baby, and again, naming the baby Clark. So, it's definitely important in terms of, where we're going moving forward. As far as how Doomsday even re-entered the picture, like I said before, it goes back to 0 Hour. I mean, we find out essentially that we don't need to rehash all of 0 Hour, but Hal Jordan turned Parallax, tried to rewrite time. And to save the day, they had to basically restart time, so have a new Big Bang, and everything had to happen again. And somehow that allowed Brainiac's Kaluan servant to intercept Doomsday at the end of time. There you go. Yeah. So 0 Hour.
Get him. Yeah, that was a stretch. I was glad they did explain it eventually, because I'm going, again, how do we get him? He was the end of time. Entropy, dead. So at least they tried.
Yeah. And as far as this Brainiac Doomsday combo, in fairness, it was cool to see. It was a different take on Doomsday, right? So what would happen if he, not only can talk, but he's brilliant, right? So now you have this combination. But I think, and I don't know, this is not a failing of the story. I think this kind of proves what Loeb and McGinnis would later show in Superman 175. It's because reading the story, Doomsday possessed by Brainiac did not fight as viciously as we had seen before. So I think having that mind, allowed for more strategy, but also kind of held back the ferocity.
Right. He was a calculated fighter, not just a terror.
Right.
Yeah.
And I did like the way that ultimately, we were talking about this before, the Justice League is fighting Doomsday on the moon, and Superman rigs up these 4 JLA transporters, and Doomsday is forever until the next return, but forever trapped between the 4. So he's never more than 25% whole. So that was a neat
I thought that,
solution.
I dug that too. And I think there was a little snippet in there too. It's like the teleporter batteries will last for like hundreds of years or something like that. I was like, all right, that's fine.
That works.
That was good. You did it. You crossed all your T, whatever. I think the last close up that I think is really good to think about is, as we've talked about in the past, there's always a good redemption side of this. Like, we have the redemption story of the cows way back, and the redemption of like Adam Grant, and feeling like he didn't fail the Rosses. He was able to kind of almost make up for losing Adam kind of deal. So I like that part.
That's the thing. In both of these stories, he's overcoming fear. Yeah. He's overcoming guilt. He really does go on an emotional journey in these stories. I think Jurgens really did a great job with both of these. I really, for the most part, I think they really held up well. I enjoyed reading them. Definitely Hunter Prey. But again, most of Doomsday Wars I thought was really interesting, just not so much the Doomsday part of it. But again, I think that just goes to show what we've been talking about, that, you can only go back to that well so many times.
Right.
But for these stories, again, they were really enjoyable. So yeah, for anyone who hasn't read them, I do recommend them.
It's worth it. There's 2 versions of like the way to get the trade too, and I'm not sure which one is more in print or cheaper. Like, you can get this one, which is part 5 of the volumes. There's also one that's separate called Superman Doomsday. That's like, actually, this was nice magazine form, but there's also one that's in like newspaper form too. That's a little bit thicker. It's got a few extra issues in there too.
And they are on the app as well, believe it or not.
They are. Yep. Yeah. So something I was thinking about when you were talking, just to kind of close up, I'm just curious, like, we're talking about, like, we can go down so many different paths. Obviously, Superman and comics have been around for 80 years. Okay. And now plus. Can you think of anything else, any other medium that we could just talk and talk and talk? I mean, it's such a deep history of characters and all these little side characters. Like, if we just look at like the Kenner toy line stuff we were talking about, Massacre and the Cyborg Superman, there's so many incredible little side characters, and that goes for every superhero universe, the Batman universe, the Wonder Woman, Justice League, all the Marvel side of things. I was kind of struggling, like, what else is there out there? Like, you could be a Lord of the Rings fan, but it's got an end. Like, there's a limit to what you can talk about. Like, does that track with you? Like, it's just pretty incredible.
Oh yeah, 100%. It's a very, special, powerful thing. And, specifically with respect to Superman, it's like, that's why I do this podcast. And why that's the thing. Like, there are plenty of Superman podcasts, and we all somehow seem to find our own angle.
Yeah.
Which at a certain point you'd be like, well, there's only so many ways you can come at this. But it's like, when you have a mythology this vast, there are so many angles, there's so many different pockets, so many different ways to come at it. And yeah, you're right. I mean, it's not just Superman. I think Superman is one of the best, if not the best examples. But yeah, I mean, across comics, especially with these characters who have decades under their belt. And I think too, because it's not, even if it were just comics, there's still plenty to explore, but it's the fact that we have all these adaptations and the material is constantly being reinterpreted. And it lends itself to these types of discussions. It's, again, I know I say this a lot, but I mean, this has been such a joy, doing this show. And I wouldn't have expected that there would be, I mean, I expected to an extent when I decided to do this, that we'd have a lot to talk, but I don't think I could have really anticipated, like, just how deep we were going to dig into all of this stuff. It's been great.
And that's the thing. Like, you look at this, we spent 2 hours talking about one trade. Like, it's really 7 issues, but it's when you find 2 people that resonate on the exact same frequencies, there's a lot to talk about. And like, I hope that everybody listening, like, finds somebody in your circles that you can or like seek out somebody that you could just go to a coffee house, go to a bar, go to a library, just talk. It's awesome. It's fun. And you so pinball off of things into different conversations, different walks of life, different sides of humanity. It's a lot of fun to talk about. So that's why I love coming back. Anytime you say, want to talk? I'm like, yes.
Well, that's a beautiful sentiment. Yeah, I echo that. And, if for whatever reason you're not able to have those conversations with people, I hope that this podcast can help, fill that need to whatever extent it can. And Bernie, thank you so much. I always love having you on here. And in fact, you'll be back in just a few episodes to help me break down one of the portions of the Triangle Era. When you come back in a few episodes, we'll be talking about the period from Dead Again through the Death of Clark Kent conduit storyline. So there's a lot of great stuff coming up over these 7 episodes. And, in case anyone, if you didn't notice, this was episode 75 of Digging for Kryptonite. And it's not an accident that we start Death Till Wedding at number 75. So we're always planning stuff out here.
Well done. That's awesome. And you might actually get me to have to use the app in some ways too, because I think Death of Clark Kent is in trade form, but the other stuff is not. Like the Dead Again stuff's not. So I don't really want to pull into my old issues. I might. Who knows? Well, put on a pair of gloves.
Well, either way, I look forward to the next time you're here. And everyone, thank you for listening. Make sure you come back next week for part 2 of Death Till Wedding. Until then, remember, it's about what you do. It's about action. Support the show and receive exclusive additional content, including my DC movie rewatch podcast at patreon.com/Anthony Desiato. Thank you to all patrons for enabling me to produce this show. Also, be sure to explore the other shows within the Flat Squirrel Podcast Network, which is home to Digging for Kryptonite, another exciting episode in the Adventures of Superman, Summoning the Zords, and My Comic Shop History, all hosted by yours truly. Subscribe for free wherever you get your podcasts. Visit flatsquirrelproductions.com for more. Thank you all.